All right, hello everyone. Today is, November 2nd, 2015. My name is Luke Thomas. This is the Monday Morning Analyst here on MMAfighting.com. 3 parts to this podcast. Try to get it in 30 minutes or less. This one will be definitely less than 30 minutes. Today we're just going to talk about not any fights that happened over the weekend because there was not a whole lot of significance. Just something that interesting that happened, I think, on Friday or Thursday when Rousimar Palhares went before the Nevada Athletic Commission. And the referee during that match, Steve Mazzagatti, was required to make some interesting statements about what he saw. So the first part, we'll talk about that. Second part, we're going to talk about just something related to what he said. And then the third part, we'll get out of here very fast. Just a quick look ahead to what's on this Friday and Saturday. Okay, so 3 parts, 1, 2, and 3. Let's kick this first part off in 5 minutes or less. Let's do that now. Here we go. Okay, we're on the clock. So Steve Mazzagatti was the referee for World Series of Fighting 22, the welterweight contest at the time between Rousimar Palhares and Jake Shields. Jake Shields, as we know, was submitted by Kimura late in that fight. What was interesting was Mazzagatti, who didn't do the most awesome job as referee for different reasons during that fight, was asked about what he saw and different pieces and whatnot. Was never, by the way, asked about the repeated eye gouging that went on, which of course is problematic, but different problem for a different time. What he was asked about, though, was the Kimura that Rousimar Palhares used. And specifically, he was asked something I thought was actually really interesting. He was asked by the commission, how'd you know it was deep? How'd you know? And the answer that he gave was basically, I've got a sense for those things when they're deep. Now, look, I don't want to beat up on Mazzagatti too bad. I think in some parts there's been times where people said he did badly, and he really didn't do that badly. There's been times where he did badly, and of course, he did just as bad as people said. I'm not here to tell you that he's a good referee. I'm not in any way putting forth that idea. I'm just here to tell you that if I'm speaking honestly, I don't think that he's the worst referee I've ever seen, although he's got problems, to be sure. But it's not about Mazzagatti as a whole generally. This is not some referendum on him. But I thought the question to him actually was really interesting. How did you know in this case the Kimura was deep? If a referee at the highest level is asked that, and you can say, well, it's World Series of Fighting, it's very high, but it's not the highest. I would submit to you that Jake Shields can beat a lot of guys who are in that UFC roster right now. Definitely Rousimar Palhares could. Those are guys who could compete at the highest level. And, on his best day, I think we could all agree, I don't think he's the best welterweight out there, but on his best day, Palhares might be able to catch just about anyone in that division. So this is a really high level. It's a very, very high level. This is not some level that's, at least for that fight, is very distinguishable from at least mid to upper tier of the Ultimate Fighting Championship. If a referee is in that level and is asked, how do you know the Kimura is deep? I understand that a referee might, want to be vague so that it doesn't confuse commission members, or that, there's no need to be overly technical. A few things you can list is probably okay. We didn't even get that. That to me was kind of problematic, right? If a referee at that level is asked, how do you know a choke is deep? How do you know an armbar is deep? How do you know a Kimura is deep? How do you know about these different stress and control positions? How do you know if they're working or not? Now, again, if someone goes to sleep, then they know. If somebody, whatever the case, there's different obvious things, and then the Kimura, it can be bent in a way where, that doesn't look normal. The average person can sort of say that. So it's not like I think his answer is terrible, and I almost know that what he means, like he's been there before, he can kind of see something is up. But one, his positioning in the fight wasn't great. You'll see here in just a minute that he wasn't where he really needed to be. Of course, everything kind of happened fast. I'm just saying it wasn't perfect. But to me, this should be like a litmus test. The truth, and I'll mention this again a little bit later, but the truth about jiu-jitsu and MMA is that, again, we're dealing with a Kimura here. We're not dealing with De La Hiva guard. We're not dealing with reverse De La Worm guard. Nothing like that. This is a Kimura. If a referee at the highest level, now maybe not the lowest level, but at the highest level is asked, how do you know a Kimura is deep? I believe they should be able to tell you that and point to a few mechanical things. Jiu-jitsu is mechanics. It is biomechanics, right? You're making the body do things it's not supposed to do to achieve a certain outcome. I am going to close off the carotid arteries to make you pass out. I'm going to bend your arm out past its breaking point so that it will break. Things like that. And to do that takes a lot of skill and expertise and time. But the point being is, you should be able to, not just from seeing an arm that doesn't look quite right, but there are things that set that up. The interesting part about the Palhares Shield submission is that it went from 0 to 60, basically. There wasn't a whole lot of time to note. But, not all submissions happen quite so easily, and someone can be in a bad stress position. A referee should be able to tell you mechanically, this, and this. This says this about that. This says this about those things. This together gives me a pretty decent composite sketch. And of course, it's also easier to break down video after the fact. I'm not saying otherwise. But what I am saying is, on a fundamental level, if a commission asks a referee, how did you know the Kimura was deep? I need an answer more than, well, I had a general sense about it. So, in thinking about the question, I decided to look at it, and again, breaking down video after the fact is much easier. But I'm going to go through the act of showing you, here is why the Kimura on Rousimar Palhares was so very deep. Watch this. Okay, what's up everybody? So part 2 here, I'm going to try something a little bit new and take a look at specifically, what Mazzagatti could have said when asked, how do you know the Kimura is deep? How do you know? So I want to ask you how you know a Kimura is deep. How do you know? Now look, anybody can kind of look at, and let me get some drawing here. Let's get some decent color. Let's get, let's say yellow here, right? Let's close it out. Okay, anyone can look at the bend here in this arm and realize, behind the back that this is not okay, right? This is not something that looks awesome. But there should be more than that. You should be able to answer at least in some kind of detail about this. And look, here's the truth about this. You don't got to be a black belt. You don't need to be a black belt to be able to answer this question competently. You just have to have, I think, some fundamental knowledge of some key positions. MMA Jiu-Jitsu is very interesting where, these aren't very super sophisticated guards most of the time. You might get a Cole Miller out there who can hit like a Holeta sweep and stuff like that, but generally speaking, we're dealing with arm bars and Kimuras and very simple timed back takes. They're done at maybe a black belt level, but these aren't super sophisticated. It's just really, 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 really solid fundamentals. And that's what you see here with Rousimar Palhares. Let's forget about the fact that he held this too long for just a second. I know that may be difficult, but let's just try. If someone were to ask you, how do you know this Kimura is deep? Again, there is some, in Mazzagatti's defense, there's visually, obviously some, you can see shields here turning purple, right? That's not a good thing. And then, of course, mentioned before, the crook in the arm, which we'll get to in a little more specific way in just a second. But okay, those things are fairly obvious. But it doesn't need to be this bad for you to be able to say what's going on here. I would say 3 things, basically, to me, tell me how deep this is, okay? And 2 things really within one based off of that. Number 1, he doesn't have live toes here at Palhares, so that part isn't all that great if you look at the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. But what he does have, which I find very interesting, you can't quite see here, he has live toes on this leg. If you look down there, he'd have live toes. So he's pushing off here. But for me, the big thing is he stepped over the head. Right, he stepped over the head. Now, why is that a big deal? Now, you'll notice Shields' hand is actually underneath, like he's almost like a deep half. Normally, this knee would be on the other side of the leg, but that's not the end of the world. That doesn't have to be that way, especially when you got a lot of things going on. But the first thing I notice is he's got a great base under him. He doesn't have live toes on his right leg, his left leg, but on his leg, he's stepping over on Jake Shields. He's using that to balance himself and you'll see in a minute, turn everything into it. But he's also got a great structure to hold himself in place. Also, when you step over the head like that, what it allows you to do is it prevents them from sitting up and rocking you pastward. Now, it should be noted, if Palhares, let's say he kept turning this, he'd probably break Shields' arm, but let's say he kept turning it without breaking it, he could get rolled. If you're back here, actually it's more back here, obviously. If that angle begins to face towards, not just behind him, but then down towards the mat, what that winds up doing is it actually off-balances you. Palhares is in a great space here because he doesn't do that. So the first thing is, to me, if you got a guy in a Kimura and it's locked up pretty deep just visually on that arm and he stepped over the head, that's bad news. Now, he can get rolled even still stepping over the head, but to me, if someone asked you how do you know it's deep, I would say he's stepping over the head. He's got a great base under him. The second thing, and this is the most important thing really, because he could have finished this without stepping over the head, is Shields' arm is attached here. It's attached to Palhares. Look at something here on Palhares. Palhares' arms are not extended out. Look at how like everything is hugged here. Palhares' right arm, his elbow, look, it has a clear bend in it. Look at that, right? So what does that tell you? We've talked about this before in this podcast. Where are you strongest? When your elbows are touching your ribs. You're very strong in that compact space. The more your arms are extended, the weaker you are, right? So think about gymnasts, the male gymnasts who do the iron cross. Why is it such a big deal? Well, because they're holding themselves at the weakest possible position almost. And they hold themselves still for seconds at a time. It's very, very difficult to do, right? And this that's a show of strength and balance and muscle coordination. We're just trying to submit a guy here. So you see what he does here is he attaches Shields' arm to his body. Why is that relevant? It's relevant because he's not taking Shields' arm and with his own arms driving it across his body. He's attaching Shields' arm to his own body and then just rotating the top of his trunk. That means you bring the weight and full force of your body along with it. You don't have to muscle your arms against theirs. Actually, if you watch a lot of cop shows, maybe I don't necessarily, but from what I've seen, they often, when they try to subdue someone, they often try to go my arms against your arms. And obviously they're not going to be experts in jiu-jitsu, but it should be noted here, and we'll watch the Vine in just a second. What he does is he brings Shields' arm to him. Now there's space here. The elbow isn't quite against the chest. Okay, I mean, it's a resisting guy. It's MMA in live action. It's not going to be perfect, but it's pretty damn close. You can see it's touching his body all through here. So all he has to do is, if I attach you to me and I rotate, a simple rotation, a basic rotation, you're going to come along with me, but you're going to come along with me at an angle that's not so awesome for you. So the second part is you can just see Palhares' arms are not extended away. They're nice and tight. Now, obviously, the hand of Shields here is behind his back. That's another thing you can point to and say, okay, obviously it doesn't look so good. I'd also point out that Mazzagatti should be around, well, let's point here. Should be around here-ish. But, okay, this wasn't like Palhares had him in side control and and just moved up there. This happened in transition, so maybe he thought he was in the best place. But whatever, it's not an ideal spot. But okay, so those are a few things we can point to. The next thing I'd point to is, yes, Shields' fist is behind his back. Well, that's bad, but that's still not enough. What I would say is, look how close Shields' thumb is to the column of Shields' own spine. Dude, that's very close. And why is that relevant? Well, the reason why is, if you drew a line out here and then a line out here behind the elbow, this would be basically like a perfect angle you could put, like Shields could put his elbow at. He could bring his elbow right up here and he could extend his arm down, okay? But what you want is you want to break that. You don't want to give them the perfect angle. You want to take things as far away from that perfect angle. So you can see the thumb here really close to the spine, and moreover, if you just, let me change this for a second so you can understand. Well, let's actually color it in, blue, so you can see what I'm talking about here. Think of all this. Think of all of this. All that blue, all that negative space, that would be the perfect angle. That's how much Palhares is taking that away. Look at that. He's driving the thumb over into the back, taking away what would be a perfect angle and making it like the opposite of this. That would be perfect, all the blue filled in against the yellow line. He's doing the opposite of that. So thumb close to the spine, taking away, or I should say creating all that negative space away from perfect. Man, that is a deep, deep, deep Kimura. He's in a bad way here. So look, anybody can basically look at this and say, well, yes, it's deep. Of course, it's very, very deep. The arm's not supposed to look that way. But you got to be able mechanically to say why it doesn't look right. One thing I did notice, and again, I don't have enough experience, or hardly really any, with MMA gloves to note, typically the Kimura, one thing you should note here, typically the Kimura, see how he's got like a C grip? See that thumb here? Typically, you don't do that. Typically, you make like a monkey paw, where all your thumb is adjoined to your fingers. Now, I'm not sure if he's making some adjustment on the fly, or if he's, maybe he feels that's a stronger grip. It's actually not, typically anyway, or it was something he just caught in transition. But one thing to note, the thumb there and then the no live toes here sort of make that a less than perfect Kimura, but it is pretty dang close. Stepped over the head, solid base under him, hips, look where the hips are pointing. Hips pointing into it because he's rotated his body, he's attached Shields' arm to his own, everything is nice and tight in here, and he's rotating it out. Thumb close to the spine, and it's look how far off the perfect angle it is. Look at all that negative space in there. All that negative space. Crazy Kimura he's got here. So let's take a look at that in real time, and you can understand why people are so, or you should take a look at it in real time to just get an appreciation for what's happening here. So look at this, rotates it into him. You see that? We're going to watch one more time, and of course he gets punched in the face here. But check this out, now look, he just rotates his body over. He doesn't wrench with his hands. Palhares does not wrench with his hands. This is key here, rotates him over, just turns his own torso. Good solid base under him. One more time here. Look at the left leg here of Palhares. Look at him straining. Yeah, you see that? Solid base underneath him. Doing that right there. This is what you wanted. Arm attached to him, rotating of the hips to turn the arm. The arm here is being turned by the hips. That's what's being turned. That's how this is done. All right, well, I can't. There we go. All right. Anyway, so if someone asked you how you know this Kimura is deep, I would clearly say, for me, the big one, stepped over the head. Everything was nice and tight here. You can finish it even when the arms are extended, but it's much harder, and you can see, wow, the thumb is super close to the spine. Of course, you need the better angle around here to do that, but whatever the case may be. That, folks, is how you know a Kimura is deep. All right, and just to wrap up, Part 3, you guys already know what time it is. This Friday and Saturday, both a Bellator and a UFC card. They both have their pluses and minuses. This is supposed to be a tentpole event for Bellator. It's one of the weaker ones, I would say. Bellator 145 takes place at the Scott Trade Center in St. Louis, Missouri, 9 p.m. Eastern on Friday, November 6th, and then, of course, the prelims at 7 p.m. on Spike.com. This is the place where they held the last fight, the Kimbo Slice fight, against Ken Shamrock, so they're back there. The card consists of Justin Lawrence from The Ultimate Fighter taking on Emmanuel Sanchez. Sanchez is a very tough guy. I think out of the Duke Rufus camp, if I'm not mistaken. Michael Chandler taking on David Rickles, bit of a rematch. Chandler starched him last time, but I think still in that rebuilding phase for him. Bobby Lashley taking on James Thompson. That should be, whatever it is. Will Brooks taking on Marcin Held, defending his lightweight title, very, very good. And then the rubber match between Patricio Pitbull Freire and Daniel Strauss is your main event. Some decent action there, I think, obviously in the lighter weights to expect from that one. And then UFC Fight Night 77, this takes place at Ginásio de, I can't even pronounce this place. It takes place in Sao Paulo, Brazil. This is Belfort versus Henderson 3. This, I believe, airs on Fox Sports 1, as does the preliminary card. There are 3 fights that will air on the UFC Fight Pass card. None of those are particularly relevant, except Pedro Munoz is on the Fight Pass card, so keep a lookout for him. Not a lot to like on the prelim card. There is Clay Guida versus Thiago Tavares. That's interesting. Johnny Case is back. Gleason Tebow versus Abel Trujillo. That has some value as well. The main card, Maldonado versus Corey Anderson. Some folks might like that. I'm not the biggest Maldonado fan. The blood and guts kind of thing isn't my favorite. The one I'm looking out for, the most important one for me, Gilbert Burns taking on Rashid Magomedov. That's a big one. A very, very big one. Thomas Almeida is back against Anthony Burchak. Glover Teixeira against Patrick Cummins. And then, of course, Vitor Belfort versus Dan Henderson in the main event. Again, all the main card, half the prelim card will air on Fox Sports 1. All right, get at me on Twitter at SBN Luke Thomas. Email me at luke.thomas@sbnation.com if you have any questions, comments, or concerns. And until next time, enjoy the fights.